Everyone thinks they know Lucille Ball, the laughter, the red hair, the television legend who built an empire by making America smile. But behind the cameras, Lucille carried memories she rarely shared. Quiet judgments formed not by gossip, but by what she witnessed when the lights went out. In this video, we explore the private side of Hollywood's golden age through Lucille's eyes. The moments when glamour cracked, where charm turned sharp, where icons revealed something colder, darker, or dangerously fake. From icy control to beautiful chaos, from cruelty masked as strength to smiles that hid threats. These stories were never meant for applause. Stay with me, because by the end you may never look at classic Hollywood or its legends the same way again. The woman behind the laughter. Hollywood's smiles never fooled Lucille Ball. While the world knew her as the sharp-tongued redhead who turned sitcom chaos into an empire, those closest to her understood something deeper. Lucille survived an industry that devoured women whole. She watched careers rise overnight and vanish just as quickly. She learned early that charm on camera often concealed something far more dangerous off it. Over decades of work, Lucille built more than studios and shows. She built instincts. And those instincts sharpened with time. By the later years of her life, Lucille carried memories she rarely shared publicly. Private conversations, quiet observations, moments where glamour cracked just enough to expose what lived underneath. She once admitted to a friend that fame didn't reveal character, it hid it, and only when the camera stopped rolling did the truth emerge. Among the many stars she encountered, there were 7 women whose behavior unsettled her deeply. These weren't rumors or gossip whispered by outsiders. These were first-hand experiences witnessed in studios, dressing rooms, charity events, and private gatherings. Women adored by millions, women immortalized as legends. Yet to Lucille, they carried something darker: cruelty, chaos, calculation, or fraudulence that left scars on those beneath them. She didn't speak of them lightly. Each name carried weight. Each memory lingered longer than applause ever could. And among all of them, one woman stood above the rest, a symbol of ice disguised as perfection: Joan Crawford. Long before history re-examined Crawford's legacy, Lucille had already reached her verdict, and it was one she never softened, not even with time. Joan Crawford, glamour wrapped in ice. To the public, Joan Crawford was the embodiment of control. Every pose is deliberate. Every expression is sculpted. She was discipline, elegance, and authority personified. But Lucille Ball saw something else entirely. Where audiences saw poise, Lucille sensed emptiness. Where fans admired strength, Lucille felt coldness. She once whispered to a trusted friend, almost apologetically, "All she has is glamour. Strip it away and you're left with ice." It wasn't envy. It wasn't a rivalry. Lucille had no desire to be Joan Crawford. What unsettled her was what existed behind the perfection. Their paths crossed many times, but the moment that crystallized Lucille's opinion came during Crawford's 1971 guest appearance on Here's Lucy. The tension didn't arrive loudly. It settled quietly the moment Crawford stepped onto the lot. She demanded that the studio temperature be set to precisely 68 degrees. Her chair is positioned at a precise angle, lighting adjusted to sculpt her cheekbones just right. Lucille brushed off the demands. She'd dealt with divas before. But then came the incident that changed everything. A young wardrobe assistant, barely 22, approached with a dress containing the faintest wrinkle, something invisible to most. Crawford leaned in and whispered venomously, "You are a useless little nothing. A toilet would be fortunate to have you." The girl fled in tears. Crawford demanded she be fired. Lucille intervened immediately, refusing. When cameras rolled, Crawford transformed, warm, dazzling, flawless. The instant they stopped, she went still again. Later, Lucille muttered, "I've worked with mannequins who felt more alive." To Lucille, that wasn't sarcasm, it was a diagnosis. The test of power. Lucille Ball believed in one rule above all others. How someone treats those with no power reveals everything. Joan Crawford failed that test completely. It haunted Lucille, not because it was dramatic, but because it was effortless. Crawford didn't lose control, she exercised it. Cruelty was precise, quiet, and intentional. That disturbed Lucille more than shouting ever could. Over time, Lucille noticed a pattern. Crawford rarely lashed out at equals. Directors, producers, executives. Her venom was reserved for assistants, crew members, or anyone who couldn't fight back. To Lucille, this wasn't temperament, it was character. During filming breaks, Crawford would sit in silence, unmoving, conserving herself like a machine waiting to be switched on. Crew members learned to avoid eye contact. Even praise felt transactional. Lucille, who thrived on warmth and connection, found the atmosphere suffocating. She later said Crawford didn't interact, she tolerated. And once she no longer needed someone, they ceased to exist. Lucille refused to attack her publicly. She didn't need to. But privately, she never wavered. Joan Crawford remained the one woman she consistently described as irrevocably cruel. Not misunderstood, not wounded, not complicated. Cruel. Years later, when Crawford's reputation began to fracture publicly, Lucille felt no satisfaction, only quiet confirmation. She already knew. She had already seen behind the curtains. And for Lucille, that knowledge lingered far longer than Crawford's carefully maintained image ever could. Judy Garland, Brilliance with a body count. If Joan Crawford represented ice, Judy Garland represented fire. Lucille Ball's feelings toward Judy were different. Less anger, more exhaustion. Whenever Garland's name surfaced, Lucille's expression softened into something heavy and tired. Judy wasn't cruel in intention, but to Lucille the damage she caused was undeniable. They'd known each other since their early MGM days. Lucille admired Judy's voice, her vulnerability, her once-in-a-generation talent. But she also witnessed the chaos that followed her everywhere. Judy arrived late, or unsteady, or not at all. Entire productions stalled waiting for her. Crew members lost jobs, budgets collapsed. Yet Judy would step in, deliver brilliance effortlessly, and walk away, leaving others to clean up the wreckage. One story haunted Lucille deeply. A television shoot is scheduled for 5 a.m. The crew waited for hours. Judy arrived at 2 p.m., glowing, apologetic, irresistible. She delivered 30 flawless minutes of performance, reminding everyone why she was legendary. Then she announced she was exhausted and left. 3 crew members were fired the next day due to the overrun. Lucille had clawed her way up through discipline because the industry punished women mercilessly for mistakes. Watching Judy squander her gift while others paid the price felt unforgivable. Years later, Lucille said quietly, "Talent doesn't justify destruction." She never confronted Judy directly. She refused to work with her again. When Garland died, Lucille mourned the brilliance, but not the chaos that followed her everywhere. Ava Gardner, beauty that enjoyed the wound. Ava Gardner unsettled Lucille Ball in a way few people ever did. It wasn't envy, it wasn't a rivalry. It was recognition. Lucille believed Ava didn't simply lash out, she enjoyed the damage she caused. Ava's beauty disarmed rooms instantly. Men excused her. Women hesitated to challenge her. That immunity gave her freedom, and Lucille watched how she used it. The moment that sealed Lucille's opinion occurred during an MGM wardrobe fitting in the mid-1960s. A young assistant nervously presented Ava with a freshly steamed dress. One seam had softened slightly from oversteaming, barely noticeable, easily fixable. Ava studied the girl, then said slowly, "Don't bother fixing it. You can't correct incompetence by adding more incompetence." The assistant froze. Lucille felt something tighten in her chest. This wasn't frustration. It was domination delivered with pleasure. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't rage. She savored it. Later, Lucille confided to a friend that Ava didn't create awkward moments. She created victims. That distinction mattered. Ava's cruelty surfaced again at an industry cocktail party when Lucille's name came up in the conversation. Ava lifted her glass and said loudly, "Oh, the washed-up clown, is she still working?" The room went silent. Ava smiled. Lucille never confronted her. She didn't need to. She believed Ava's beauty protected her from consequences and that people tolerated behavior they'd condemn in anyone else. If she hadn't been beautiful, Lucille once said bitterly, no one would have forgiven who she really was. The rift never healed. A face the world forgave. Time transformed Ava Gardner into a myth. Posters replaced memory. Her face became an icon stripped of context. Lucille watched this transformation with quiet disgust. To her, Ava's beauty became a shield that history used to excuse her behavior. Lucille noticed how interviews softened Ava's cruelty into temperament, how biographies reframed cutting remarks as wit. What Lucille remembered was precision cruelty. Remarks crafted to humiliate without witnesses brave enough to object. She believed Ava selected her targets carefully – young women, assistants, anyone who couldn't push back. Lucille respected strength, but she despised cruelty masquerading as confidence. She once told a colleague that Ava never grew out of her meanness because it always worked. People laughed, people forgave, people stayed silent. Over the years, Lucille refused joint appearances, tributes, or projects that would require polite revisionism. She didn't want to help rewrite history. When Ava appeared in documentaries or magazine retrospectives, Lucille would murmur the same line under her breath. They have no idea. To Lucille, Ava represented a Hollywood sin far worse than chaos or ice. Cruelty rewarded with adoration. It convinced Lucille that beauty could be dangerous when paired with indifference to suffering. Ava never apologized, never softened, and Lucille never wavered. Long after Ava's image became eternal, Lucille's memory of her remained unchanged. A beautiful woman who discovered she could hurt people without consequences and never stopped. Bette Davis, cutting for sport. Bette Davis commanded respect the moment she entered a room. Her talent was undeniable. Her presence was electric. But Lucille Ball sensed hostility immediately. With Bette, there was no slow reveal. Sharpness radiated openly. Lucille once asked behind closed doors, why does she enjoy hurting people so much? Their worst encounter occurred at an industry dinner in the mid-1960s. A young waiter mistakenly delivered the wrong wine to Betty's table. Small error, easily corrected. Bette stared at the boy and hissed, "Do you even know how to read a label, or is that too difficult for you?" He apologized repeatedly. Bette continued. She didn't want a resolution. She wanted humiliation. Lucille watched, stunned. This wasn't impatience. It was intentional cruelty performed as entertainment. Later that evening, Bette caught Lucille's eye and raised her glass in mock friendliness. Lucille didn't return the gesture. Her conclusion was already formed. She later told a friend, Crawford was cold, but Bette liked inflicting the wound. That difference mattered. Lucille believed greatness should protect people, not crush them. She respected excellence deeply, but never when it was used as a weapon. Lucille and Bette occupied the same world, but moved around each other like oil and water. They never became friends, they never reconciled, and Lucille never softened her view. When talent becomes a license. As years passed, Lucille watched Hollywood elevate Bette Davis into an untouchable legend. Tributes celebrated her fearlessness. Interviews framed her cruelty as honesty. Lucille rejected that narrative entirely. To her, there was nothing brave about punching down. She believed Bette confused dominance with strength and used her reputation to silence discomfort. Lucille declined invitations to joint interviews or retrospectives. She didn't want to smile beside someone she believed enjoyed breaking people. She once stated plainly, "Greatness should lift others, not leave bruises." That philosophy guided her entire career. Lucille built sets where the crew felt protected, where mistakes were corrected without humiliation. She believed leadership was revealed in restraint. Watching Bette, rewarded for cruelty, only hardened Lucille's resolve. It confirmed what she already suspected. Hollywood often mistook sharpness for substance. Over time, Lucille stopped discussing Bette publicly altogether. Silence became her boundary. But privately, her judgment never changed. Bette represented a lesson Lucille carried with her until the end. Talent does not excuse harm, and brilliance does not absolve cruelty. In Lucille's moral ledger, Betty's wounds outweighed her applause, and that verdict never softened with age. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the smile that lied. Zsa Zsa Gabor provoked a reaction from Lucille Ball unlike the others. There's no anger, no visible irritation, no tension tightening her posture. There was laughter, sharp, disbelieving laughter. When Zsa Zsa's name surfaced, Lucille didn't stiffen or sigh. She laughed because, to her, nothing about Zsa Zsa was real. Not the accent, not the warmth, not the elegance. Lucille believed Zsa Zsa was performance layered upon performance. A woman who treated life as a stage and people as disposable props. The moment that cemented Lucille's judgment occurred at the charity event in the late 1960s. Cameras flashed as Zsa Zsa entered, draped in diamonds and fur, smiling like royalty. But the illusion cracked the instant photographers moved on. A volunteer politely guided her toward a table. Zsa Zsa snapped, "I don't sit with peasants." Lucille heard it clearly from across the room. That sentence revealed everything. Moments later, a young volunteer accidentally brushed Zsa Zsa's coat. Zsa Zsa leaned in and whispered, "Touch my coat again, and I'll make sure you never work an event in this town." Her smile never faded. Lucille felt sick. To her, false kindness was worse than open cruelty. It disarmed people. It hid the knife until damage was already done. Later that night, Lucille told a colleague, "Nothing about her is authentic." Zsa Zsa didn't intimidate Lucille. She disgusted her, profoundly and permanently. The most dangerous kind of evil. Lucille Ball believed cruelty came in many forms. Some people were openly harsh. Others were cold and distant. But the most dangerous kind, she thought, was the kind that smiled. Zsa Zsa Gabor embodied that danger perfectly. She never raised her voice. She never appeared angry. Her threats arrived wrapped in sweetness, affection, and laughter. That made them harder to confront and easier to excuse. Lucille noticed how people defended Zsa Zsa endlessly. "She's just dramatic. She didn't mean it. That's just her accent." Excuses followed her everywhere, insulating her from consequences. That terrified Lucille more than outright cruelty ever could, because it meant Zsa Zsa never had to stop. Years later, when Zsa Zsa famously slapped a Beverly Hills police officer in 1989, Lucille barely reacted. She simply murmured, "There she is. That's the real one." To Lucille, it wasn't shocking. It was confirmation. The mask had slipped in public just long enough to expose what she had always known. Zsa Zsa wasn't misunderstood. She was calculated. She used charm to gain access, then used status to threaten, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Lucille never forgave her, and she never revised her opinion. She believed history would remember the diamonds, the laughter, the extravagance, but it would forget the fear Zsa Zsa left behind. That, Lucille believed, was how the most dangerous people survived, with their legacies intact and unquestioned for generations. The pattern Lucille couldn't ignore. In the later years of her life, Lucille Ball began to recognize a pattern that unsettled her deeply. Each of the women who disturbed her most shared something fundamental. They were protected by beauty, by talent, by myth. Joan Crawford's control, Judy Garland's brilliance, Ava Gardner's beauty, Bette Davis's talent, Zsa Zsa Gabor's charm. Each shielded them from consequences. Beneath those shields, Lucille saw harm repeated again and again. Assistants humiliated. Crew members fired. Volunteers threatened. People with no power absorbed the damage as the audience applauded. Lucille didn't consider herself morally superior. She considered herself observant. She had made mistakes. She'd been difficult. She never believed cruelty was currency. She built her empire on discipline, accountability, and restraint because she knew how quickly the industry turned on women. That was why these behaviors enraged her, not because these women were famous, but because they were protected. Lucille once said fame doesn't corrupt people, it reveals them, and what she saw repeatedly disturbed her. These weren't isolated incidents or misunderstandings, they were habits. And habits, Lucille believed, always told the truth more clearly than reputation ever could. Why Lucille Ball stayed silent. Lucille Ball never publicly named these women while she was alive. That silence was deliberate. She understood Hollywood's appetite for spectacle and had no interest in turning truth into entertainment. She also knew that speaking openly would invite retaliation, denial, and revisionism. Instead, she chose memory, private conversations, trusted friends, quiet refusals to collaborate. Silence became her boundary, but silence never meant forgiveness. Her opinions never softened, never blurred. She believed time revealed character more accurately than confrontation ever could. As legacies grew shinier, Lucille's memories stayed sharp. She didn't want revenge, she wanted honesty. And she understood that honesty rarely survived in public once it was filtered through headlines and mythology. That was why her judgments lived in whispers rather than declarations. Because once spoken loudly, truth in Hollywood had a way of being reshaped into something unrecognizable. Lucille preferred it intact, unaltered, carried carefully. She understood that silence carried responsibility too, and she bore that responsibility until the end, believing some truths mattered more preserved than performed. The cost of survival. Lucille Ball never claimed she survived Hollywood untouched. She understood compromise, fear, and how easily women were erased. That awareness shaped everything she did. Lucille learned early that survival required discipline, not indulgence. She arrived early, knew every line, protected her sets, and took responsibility when things went wrong. Watching others abandon that responsibility while causing harm disturbed her deeply. She remembered assistants who disappeared after speaking up, crew members who were quietly replaced, and volunteers who were warned never to return. These people didn't have memoirs or interviews. Their stories ended silently. Lucille believed that silence was the actual cost of unchecked fame. In contrast, audiences celebrated legends, while unseen casualties accumulated behind the scenes. She often wondered how many lives were altered because someone powerful needed to feel superior for a moment. That question stayed with her. Lucille wasn't naive. She knew Hollywood rewarded results, not kindness. But she refused to accept cruelty as inevitable. She believed survival shouldn't require stepping on people who couldn't fight back. That belief separated her from many peers and often isolated her. Speaking up costs opportunities, and staying silent costs peace. Lucille carried both burdens. She also carried the weight of memory. She remembered faces no one else remembered. She remembered fear no one acknowledged. And she understood that surviving long enough to see truth clearly came with a responsibility few were willing to bear. Lucille bore it quietly, knowing that survival without conscience was simply another form of loss. Strength versus damage. Lucille Ball admired strong women. She respected ambition, confidence, and authority. She was all three herself, but she drew a sharp line between strength and damage. Strength, to Lucille, was restraint. Damage was indulgence. Joan Crawford demanded control. Judy Garland demanded forgiveness. Ava Gardner demanded attention. Bette Davis demanded dominance. Zsa Zsa Gabor demanded admiration. Lucille demanded accountability, first from herself, then from others. That distinction guided every judgment she made. She believed real power didn't need spectacle. It protected people instead of crushing them. That belief shaped how she built Desilu Studios. Lucille created sets where the crew felt safe, where mistakes were corrected without humiliation, and where fear wasn't a management tool. She understood pressure, she understood deadlines, but she rejected cruelty as leadership. Watching Hollywood celebrate harmful behavior as personality only strengthened her resolve. She wanted no part in confusing sharpness with substance. Lucille believed confidence didn't require cruelty, and authority didn't excuse harm. That philosophy cost her relationships and opportunities, but she never revised it. She refused to applaud damage just because it produced results. To Lucille, the measure of strength wasn't who feared you, it was who trusted you. And that standard left her standing apart from many legends the industry chose to elevate. The loneliness of clarity. There was loneliness that came with Lucille Ball's clarity. Once she saw behind the curtain, she couldn't unsee it. As time passed, Hollywood softened the edges of troubling legacies. Cruelty became complexity. Harm was reframed as temperament. Lucille felt increasingly out of step with the narrative. She attended fewer events, declined more invitations. She had no interest in applauding illusions. Friends urged her to let it go, to forgive, to separate art from behavior. But Lucille believed memory mattered. Pretending harm didn't happen felt like participating in it. She didn't seek public reckoning or revenge. She sought personal honesty, and that honesty carried weight. Lucille understood most audiences would never hear the truths she carried. Myths were easier to celebrate than reality. She accepted that. But acceptance didn't mean agreement. She lived with the quiet burden of knowing applause often drowned out accountability. That burden didn't fade with age. It sharpened. Lucille understood that clarity came at a cost. It isolated. It has complicated relationships. But she preferred isolation to self-deception. She believed that seeing clearly, even when it was painful, was better than living comfortably in a lie. And she carried that belief until the end. What Lucille wanted remembered. Near the end of her life, Lucille Ball spoke less about names and more about principles. She wasn't interested in dismantling legacies. She wanted values remembered: kindness, accountability, restraint. She believed power without conscience hollowed everything it touched. Lucille hoped future generations would look beyond glamour and ask more complex questions. Not who was talented, but who was humane. Not who was adored, but who was decent when no one was watching. She understood history favored shine over substance, but she trusted time more than headlines. Time exposed patterns. Time revealed the truth. Lucille didn't expect the industry to change overnight. She simply wanted honesty to survive. She believed stories whispered privately mattered as much as stories told on stage. And she believed silence carried responsibility too. What Lucille wanted remembered wasn't a scandal, it was standards. She wanted strength separated from cruelty, talent separated from entitlement, fame separated from moral exemption. She knew she wouldn't control how history told its stories, but she hoped someone somewhere would listen carefully enough to hear what applause drowned out. That hope stayed with her, and in that hope Lucille placed her final trust. When myths began to crack. Lucille Ball understood something many stars never accepted. Myths eventually crack. Time erodes polish. Stories resurface. What was once whispered finds daylight. She watched it happen slowly. Biographies grew less forgiving. Interviews became more probing. Audiences started asking questions Hollywood once buried. Lucille never celebrated this shift. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt confirmed. What unsettled her most was how long harm survived beneath applause, decades before anyone listened to the people at the bottom. That delay disturbed her more than denial ever could. Lucille believed history wasn't cruel enough to liars. It simply moved slowly. She understood that legacies built on intimidation, fear, or indulgence could not remain untouched forever. Truth waited patiently. She trusted that patience. Lucille also knew myth-making protected industries, not people. Glamour was more effortless than accountability. Celebration was safer than examination. But cracks formed anyway. They always did. Lucille never rushed them. She simply observed. She believed exposure without integrity became spectacle. Spectacle solved nothing. So she stayed quiet, watching narratives bend, then fracture. She believed truth didn't need promotion. It needed endurance. And she'd lived long enough to see endurance win, slowly, imperfectly, but inevitably. That knowledge didn't bring peace, but it brought clarity. And for Lucille, clarity mattered more than applause. The audience's responsibility. Lucille Ball believed audiences carried more power than they realized. Applause wasn't passive. Attention wasn't harmless. What people rewarded shaped what survived. She often wondered how differently Hollywood might have been if cruelty had consequences sooner. Suppose charm hadn't excused harm, if talent hadn't silenced victims. Lucille didn't blame fans individually. She blamed the system that taught them not to look too closely. She understood why people loved myths. Myths were comforting. Reality was complicated. But she believed maturity required discernment. Loving art didn't need defending behavior. Admiration didn't require blindness. Lucille hoped audiences would learn to separate performance from person without erasing accountability. She believed admiration should come with standards, not moral perfection, but basic decency. That belief guided how she wanted her own work remembered. She enjoyed laughter associated with warmth, not fear. She wanted success connected to protection, not damage. Lucille believed every era faced a choice: preserve illusion or confront truth. Avoiding the truth didn't erase harm, it only postponed reckoning. And postponement always made reckoning worse. She hoped future audiences would ask better questions than her generation did. Not just who entertained us, but who we empowered, excused, and protected. In those questions, Lucille believed that change had quietly begun. Legacy without illusion. Lucille Ball's legacy wasn't spotless. She never claimed it was, but it was intentional. She believed legacy should be built consciously, not accidentally. She rejected the idea that success justified everything required to achieve it. That belief guided her decisions long after fame no longer demanded effort. She refused to rehabilitate reputations she believed were dishonest. She declined tributes that required revisionism. She chose absence over complicity. Lucille believed legacy wasn't what people said after you were gone. It was what remained consistent while you were alive, how people felt working with you, whether fear followed your name, whether relief replaced it when you entered a room. Lucille wanted laughter remembered, yes, but also safety. She wanted people to remember that power could exist without cruelty, that authority didn't require humiliation, that discipline didn't demand damage. She knew history might blur those distinctions, but she trusted individuals to remember their own experiences, and she believed those experiences mattered more than monuments. Legacy without illusion was quieter, less glamorous, but it endured longer. Lucille accepted that trade willingly. She believed truth aged better than myth, and she built her life accordingly. What the silence was saying. Lucille Ball's silence was never emptiness, it was restraint. It was a refusal. It was judgment without spectacle. She didn't shout truths because Hollywood turned shouting into noise. She chose quiet because quiet carried weight. Her silence said cruelty wasn't strength, talent wasn't immunity, charm wasn't innocence, and fame wasn't absolution. Lucille trusted listeners more than audiences. She trusted those willing to hear what applause drowned out. She believed stories survive best when handled carefully, and she believed memory carried moral responsibility. Now, with distance, her silence speaks louder than confrontation ever could. It asks uncomfortable questions. It invites reflection rather than outrage. Lucille didn't want revenge. She wanted recognition. Recognition of harm. Recognition of patterns. Recognition that brilliance without humanity leaves damage behind. Her silence wasn't fear. It was a choice. And in that choice, Lucille left behind something rarer than scandal. She left a standard, one that asks not who shone brightest, but who treated others decently when no one was watching. That question lingers, and Lucille intended it to. Lucille Ball never sought to publicize these stories. She didn't shout them. She didn't sensationalize them. She simply remembered. And sometimes memory tells us more than headlines ever could. These weren't rumors passed down for drama. They were moments witnessed firsthand, when power met silence and character revealed itself without an audience. The question now isn't whether these stories are comfortable, it's whether they matter. Because Hollywood didn't stop hiding people like this when the Golden Age ended. So, what do you think? Were these women misunderstood or protected for too long? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more untold stories from classic Hollywood's hidden side, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The following stories are already waiting. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon